This is Warren Vanderhill interviewing Alba Rosenman for the Muncie Jewish Oral History Project 2. Alba, officially, I want to thank you for agreeing to do this. The first question is sort of a general question, and that is I'd like you to comment a little bit on why you came to Muncie. I mean, were there other options that you might have considered at that point in your life?
I came as the spouse of someone who had a job there.
So what we now call officially the trailing spouse.
Correct.
Okay. When you first came here, what did you think of the community?
I was just really happy to be here, and I didn't really know the community.
Okay. Compared to those initial observations, now many years later, since we've both been around this track a few times, what do you think of it now?
Well, I'd like to go back to the previous question.
Sure.
Now that I've thought about it.
Okay.
I didn't know the community as someone might define the community as these people and those people and those people. I didn't know anybody. But I absolutely loved the pace of life because I had done my share of commuting for many years before that. And I liked how everybody said, you all come on back now. And I liked how everything was just more calm. And it isn't that I don't like to travel back to big cities, but I don't think I want to live that way. I mean, I lived that way for 23 years. So this was fun. It was just great fun.
Seething melting pot of Long Island that we both experienced.
Very seething.
Well, then go back to the second part of my question. Now, lo, these many years later, what do you think of it now?
Well, now I know a lot more things, and I still like it. And I still like it for the same reason I liked it before. We have the options to move to where our kids are. We're old enough that we can do that. But we're not really sure where they're going to be, and we're just, for the long term, and so we're perfectly delighted to stay here until they decide where they want to be, and that may not be anytime soon, and that's just fine with us.
And let me play off that a little bit since we've known each other as long as we have. Do you think that for people who've been here for a long time, largely in the university community, that what Muncie and Ball State become is kind of a base of operation?
It is for us.
Yeah, I mean, you go where your kids go. You go on vacations where they might be.
Right, but we have a nice house and a nice yard, and our dog can run around, and it's safe. And comparatively, I mean, a lot of people would say, a lot of women would say, well, I don't want to go out at night because I'm scared. And I don't know, scared of what? I mean,
right.
I have a different definition of scared. And here, I can go any place day or night, and I never worry.
Certainly different than somebody who grows up in New York City.
Well, I do have the carryover from there is that I never leave my car even in the driveway without locking it, and I never leave my office even to go down the hall without locking it. But that's not because of Muncie, that's because of New York training.
Yeah, I do the same thing. It's funny because I notice colleagues here leave their office doors open when they're gone for a half hour or something, and indeed, I think many of them do leave their car doors unlocked, and that would never even occur to me. How would you describe your life as a member of a Jewish community before you came to Muncie?
One of the expressions that I learned a long time ago, particularly traveling to Israel, when you lived in Israel, everyone was Jewish, so it was easy to be Jewish. And in New York, kind of the same thing was true. But when you come to Muncie, there's no one to be Jewish for you. So there are many things about Judaism that I learned here that I never knew before. And I told my father that one day. I said, I never even heard of lighting candles when I lived in New York. Now, that's the most fundamental thing in Judaism. I never even heard of it, never saw a picture of it. My parents were very liberal. They were a reaction to the orthodoxy of their childhood. So they were breaking away. And so when I came here, I learned things I never knew. And I had to take on responsibilities that never in my life would I have thought of doing. It never been part of my life. Not that I wasn't Jewish, I just took it for granted.
So it's been very different to be part of this Jewish community than what you experienced growing up in the borough of Queens in New York City?
Totally.
Okay.
Totally. I mean, my brother lives in Israel, and he's very religious, and he, I went to Hebrew school 3 days a week after school, and all the other kids did too. And so there was a big component of being Jewish, but it was something like you had to do something they sent you to, but there was no sense of that I had to do anything. I just had to go where they sent me. And the services were much bigger. They were much more magnificent. I don't know about magnificent. They're pretty magnificent here, but they were much more religious. We belonged to a conservative temple. We were married in an Orthodox temple. My grandparents were Orthodox. All our relatives were Orthodox. So it was like an ambiance. Everything was revolved around Jewish life, except for the small time in Queens when I lived in an Irish Catholic neighborhood and
Right.
sneaked off to confession and stuff. But that was kind of like, is that Moonstruck with Cher?
Yeah.
It was just like that, like she's praying to the Virgin Mary. Mother comes by and she says, you're Jewish, and then keeps going. Well, that's a little bit what happened to me. But then, I forgot the question. Oh, but here in Muncie, it's just completely different. Here you walk around and people say hi, and like in the Woody Allen movie, the little bubble above their head is, and she's a Jew. I don't do that in New York. I mean, I don't think that. Everybody's something different in New York, so you don't walk around looking at people and asking what they are. But here, I'm quite sure, they don't say it, but oftentimes people will slip and they'll identify me as a Jew, and they'll, hello, and then the next question will be something about being Jewish. And, it's a little bit, I don't know if irritating is the word, but I hate to use this expression. You either know your place or you know the place into which people put you.
Yeah. Well, I think of the line in Annie Hall, again, in my case, growing up in the same area of New York that you did, although from the Protestant side, where Annie Hall says to Woody Allen, you're a real Jew. I thought that's the kind of reaction you get from a lot of people out here when they discover, oh, somebody is from New York City, and gee, that person maybe characterizes as a real Jew. What part does being a member of this Jewish community, specifically Temple Bethel, play in your life today?
Well, I don't know how to really approach that question, because I think the intent of the question is, having lived through all this time, what part does it play in your life today? But the way I might alternately interpret that question is, what part does the temple play in your life today compared to what it played in your life 10 years ago and then 10 years before that? So what it plays in my life today is I'm secretary of the temple. I've made some good friends there, and I don't mean friends because we're Jewish, just friends because we get along with each other. Before it was, my kids had to be bar mitzvah, and I was going to see to it that whatever I could do that happened, and that they would grow up knowing that they were Jewish, and then if they didn't like that, they could do something else. I never felt that they had to do what I told them to do, but I wasn't going to let them grow up not having a background. So I worked very hard for that, but I never made friends in the temple. They weren't people that I really understood very well. I mean, when there was a war, I was very impressed one time when I was quite young, when we first moved here. I'm not sure I remember which war now, but it was one of the wars. The Civil War maybe. There was a meeting called, and everybody went, and people who just wouldn't even talk to each other, that all went away, and they all, I think Marty told me they raised $60,000 that night, which, 20 years ago was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I was very moved by that show of unity. But I would say that was a unique experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I was asking it more from the standpoint of somebody who comes here from New York City and becomes part of a temple community, part of a congregation. And I was just really trying to get at the question of how much that really means to you. How important is it to you in your life?
When I first moved here, I really didn't join the temple. I didn't think about joining the temple. I didn't even know the temple here. It really played no part in coming here, and it played no part in staying here. The only time I joined the temple was after our son was born, and he started to be like 2 years old and 3 years old, and I thought, I gotta think about this. So, and then we met Merle and Sylvia Plank, who were very, very nice to us, and they kind of adopted us, and we didn't have parents here, so we adopted them, and for many, many years, we were like family. And of course, if you knew Merle and Sylvia, you couldn't not join the temple.
Right.
So they pretty much I don't know if arm twisted us, but they made it very appropriate for us to join. Really, though, it was with the intent of educating our children.
Okay.
But it wasn't for any kind of religious reason or social reasons. I don't think Marvin and I ever felt that to be a Jew you had to be a joiner or an attender. And I think that's quite a unique thing in this country, that all religions, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, they have this feeling you have to be an attender, and a participant. And the kind of Judaism that I always knew is that you were a Jew. It didn't make any difference whether you joined or not. So I don't feel that I have to be a joiner. The reason I'm secretary of the temple, well, maybe we can talk about that later.
No, continue.
Well, I was principal when my son got to be 6. I became principal of the Sunday school, and I was principal of Sunday school for 8 years. And the reason for doing that was I wanted to see my 2 kids go through for bar mitzvah. So Marvin and I became quite committed to making it into a school because it was quite chaotic at that time. And it goes, if you study just the school, it goes through cycles like a sine curve, of being very organized and very disorganized depending on how many kids there are and how committed their parents are. I don't mean that they're not. I just mean it just depends who's in it. And so the basement of the temple in those days used to be mint green and like your worst nightmare of a basement. So Marvin went in there, and I won't say single-handedly because there were people who helped, but mostly it was me and Marvin. I mean, I have to say that. I don't try to brag. It's just, nobody thought that was. They thought it was really strange that you would want to go in there and do it. It was just a basement. So we pulled out all the old Venetian blinds and all stuff that was stored there, and cleaned it all up and repainted the whole thing. Marvin painted a big shalom on the wall, and we knocked down some walls and put in carpeting. And I went to Brooklyn to the Hasidic area, and I went to a textbook place, and I bought all kinds of textbooks for different levels, and I decided on a curriculum. And I mean, it was like outrageous because I was not, I'm not a basic Jewish educator. But I made a curriculum out of my head, and I talked to interviewed rabbis. It was an interesting thing, just as an historian. It may not be interesting to the Muncie story, but one of the rabbis I interviewed in Great Neck, it was at Cherry Hill School, was converted from public school to a Jewish day school. He was Orthodox, and I said to him, I'm the principal of the Sunday school in Muncie, Indiana, and I was wondering if you had any advice for me on a curriculum. And he said, come home. And I said, why? I said, you can't be Jewish there. This interview's over.
Love it.
Anyway, so I bought books, and we moved the piano in there, and I decided on a curriculum, and I mean, it was like a whole thing. And we did that for 8 years every morning. And Marvin played a really big role in the house committee, and we were really devoted and dedicated to it. But it was for our 2 boys, and whatever other kids were there, good for them. They had a good bar mitzvah experience or bat mitzvah experience. But as soon as they were done, I was done.
Yeah. In the first study that Dwight Hoover and I did of the Muncie Jewish community, we asked each of the participants about the relationship in this area between Jewish and non-Jewish people, which for the generation that I refer to as Marty Schwartz's generation was a really big thing, because those relationships were often very difficult. The question I'm asking each of the people that participate in this project, now almost a quarter of a century later, is do you think that that's an issue that's worth discussing in Muncie, Indiana in 2002?
It was an issue for us and for Sylvia Plank, because they would describe how they would get together and play cards. And I said, all the older people, and why they would do that. Because, they would talk about, these people didn't like those people, etc. And they said, well, why did you get together and play cards with them? Well, because they were Jewish.
Right.
So that's no reason to play cards with somebody. And they said, well, those were the friends we had. We had to have those. They limited it. I don't know if outsiders limited them or they limited themselves.
Okay.
But it was never an issue for us, and we said we pick our friends based on who we like to be with.
Okay. In the years that you've been here, now more than 3 decades, Have you or members of your family ever experienced any overt or covert anti-Semitism?
Certainly covert.
Okay.
Certainly covert. Well, I guess the pause will show you that nothing quickly comes to mind.
Okay. But I mean, your feeling is, you know, the way you internalize this is that there certainly have been in your mind's eye examples in that fairly long period of time of what you would define as covert anti-Semitism. I'm not trying to make a big deal of it, but I'm just wondering.
Well, it's just people, it's the stereotyping. I mean, there's a lot of stereotyping. Like one of my department chairs and I were having a conversation one day over an issue related to merit pay, and it was a small point. I mean, it was the smallest point you could imagine, which, if you figured it out by money, came out to 50 cents.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a question of principle, and strange. I would write the date the military way,
right.
And he didn't want it that way. He wanted
right.
the other way, so he took off a point, and the point, if you figured it out, it was so preposterous. And he made the comment. He looked at me and he sort of winked and he said, "Well, we both know you can afford it." And there's been a lot of comments like that. And maybe other people get those comments, but when a Jew gets those comments, that fits too easily into the stereotype. Right. You can't say that that's, covert anti-Semitism, but a Jew thinks it is.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's paranoia, but I sure get my share of those.
Yeah, I can understand that.
And then my mother died, and I got her mink coat. So I was on the elevator one day wearing a mink coat, and there was one of our esteemed, now retired Teachers College colleagues who had some comments to make about that. And
same thing.
Well, just there were just comments generally related to money, sometimes related to the way I might be assertive in the way I speak. That, well, Jewish woman from New York, kind of thing, which is kind of sometimes it's friendly, but nobody says a Protestant woman from New York. It's just you don't hear that expression.
Right, a Dutch American woman from New York.
Right.
Okay. How do you view the future of Temple Beth-El?
Well, I'm optimistic, and I'm optimistic guardedly, but I'm optimistic because of the Eliadis family.
Yeah, that was my next question, how you saw the addition to the temple.
That's one of the reasons I went back to the temple. I didn't see that kind of spirit before, and that was one of the reasons I left. Because when in New York, you see that, people around here don't like it when you say, well, in New York, like my mother used to say, well, in Argentina, this is how they do it. They said, well, go back to Argentina then. I'm not saying it in that regard, but it was my experience in New York that if something was needed, and a wing to a hospital appeared anonymously donated, or a wing to a temple appeared anonymously donated. There was a lot of very large anonymous donation, and I didn't see that here. And there was a lot of acrimony between the younger generation and the older generation at the temple on that kind of thing. I mean, it was a little bit like, this is going to be a little prejudice on my part, but one of the American values, I believe, of the dominant society is, pay your fair share, as seen in United Way. And then United Way doesn't have any problem telling you what your fair share is.
Right.
And there's a lot of, not self-monitoring, but monitoring within the group. Did you give your, a lot of passing judgment on did you give your fair share. And I believe that the older generation here, as in any culture that's superimposed on another culture, I think the Jewish community in this town was very Protestant. And I think they adopted a lot of the values of the Protestant society, so that giving your fair share became a big discussion. Not in that way, but not in those terms. But everybody was always monitoring what everybody else was giving. That's not the Jewish way. You could pay from nothing to whatever you want, and people aren't even supposed to know what you give. It's supposed to be so personal, and everybody's supposed to be welcome. And that didn't exist in the older generation. In the younger generation, people give bountifully and magnificently and privately, and that had a lot to do with me coming back. There's no acrimony about money anymore, except among the old people. And I'll sit in the board meetings, and the older people would just say things that they used to say. Makes me want to get up and leave, but I'm plugged in with a computer, and that's the reason I'm secretary, because I can type and I don't have to listen. You just type, you know.
Right.
But the younger people don't do that. The younger people, I don't know. It's just it's a whole new spirit. Now I don't know how many Jewish people there'll be in Muncie. That's you know that's always going to determine whether it continues or not. But the Eliadis is giving that, and then John, who's not even Jewish, when they ran out of money, he gave more money, and I mean everybody's not they're making one wing after another.
Right.
But I think that was really a necessary statement, and almost as a testimony to them. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't see myself quitting, even though sometimes I don't like something that goes on. I think they're just magnificent, the two of them. And then I made a couple of other friends who called me up, and that they just persisted, kind of like Sylvia and Burl did. Come on back. It's different now. It's different now. So I came back.
So your view of the addition to the temple is that it's very, very important in the future of the congregation.
Not the addition.
Oh, okay.
The gesture. Their gesture.
Good point.
Their gesture to donate that money reminded me of what it was like. The good part of being Jewish in New York is that you could always look on lists of donors in the New York Times or on any list of donors, and Jews were always very, very big donors. And so one of the stereotypes of Jews being cheap really makes me mad, because Jews are nothing if they're not generous. They're very generous, but they'll often do it anonymously so that people don't become jealous, because that's one of the reasons that they get in trouble in history, is for being perceived to have a lot of money.
Well, think of the history, again, of our years of growing up and the success of the UJA, the United Jewish Appeal in New York City. I mean, it used to just stagger people in my father's Protestant congregation that with a lot of anonymous gifts that the Jewish community in the greater metropolitan area of New York and New Jersey could raise sums of money that they did. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was really just absolutely amazing.
Well, that's what the Eliadis gift symbolized.
In context.
It's only one family, but in all those other years, I never saw anything that looked like that, and so you can infer what I did see. And what I did see was a behavior that to me wasn't Jewish behavior. And I didn't think they knew what Jewish behavior was. They'd been here so long that a lot of the things that they did in the temple were not things that I knew Jews to do. I mean, good things that they did, but they were just Protestant things. It's not about Protestants, it's about Christian. It's about non-Jewish.
Yeah, right.
The way they made decisions, the way they did things was not familiar to me. It didn't mean it wasn't good. It just meant that's very similar to the church down the street. Except the church down the street didn't have a lot of the bickering, as far as I knew. I don't know. I'm talking too much now.
Well, churches have history of bickering. They're like universities. It's not really pro forma at times unless there's some bickering or some civil strife.
I would say that some of the controversy at the temple now has to do with the relationship to Israel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's true of every congregation in the United States, though. I mean, it's a real sorting out process.
Well, it wasn't in the temple where I grew up. I mean, Israel, nobody disagreed.
Yeah, but I think we're getting off on a tangent, but I think there are questions that are being raised now about the future of Israel as a state that have really caused a lot of people who are part of the larger American Jewish community, whether it's Reform or Conservative or Orthodox, to really say, what meaning does this have for me and what should the state of Israel represent? But that's a whole other topic, so don't want to go there today.
But it is an issue in our country.
It's a major issue. I think it ought to be a major issue. I think it's a major issue for the United States. If you could have your seasonal wish list, what might be the top 1, 2, 3, whatever number you prefer, things that you would like to see happen over the next few years in the congregation?
Well, the top one is the top one I've always had, which is they should have a permanent rabbi. I mean, that's just the top one.
Well, let me stop you there for a minute, because this is going to come up, I know, in every one of these interviews. Why do you feel personally that that's such a big problem? Because 25 years ago I was having the same conversation.
my answer wouldn't have been the same 25 years ago,
Okay.
because 25 years ago, I thought about this a lot. 25, and I'm glad you asked personally, because
Right.
this is not about the future of
Right,
the temples.
right.
Personally, 25 years ago, I was a lot younger and closer to the age of the student rabbis.
Right.
For me, I have never had an opportunity to have a religious person who was of any use to me, because when I was young, they were young, so we were like, they didn't know me at all. I have such an unusual background that we couldn't really relate to each other in any kind of useful way. And then as I got older and I had, let's say, spiritual or family needs, as I got older, they were still the same age. And I had more experience than they had, and I was in the position of giving them advice, and after a while, Sylvia referred to it as, well, we have to train the rabbis, we have to raise the rabbis. Well, that's not my job, is to raise rabbis. I've got 2 children to raise. And they started being more and more immature, and it was of no value at all to me. So for me, the one thing about the rabbis that's quite nice is they are pretty scholarly. So when you go there, you'll usually hear a pretty good sermon. But personally, I have no relationship with them, and if I did, unfortunately, the next year they'd be gone. So it isn't like here today and gone tomorrow, but how much are you going to invest in a relationship again and again and again? So it's of no value.
Yeah.
So the temple's of value to me because I've made some friends.
So number 1 on your list would be that there ought to be more emphasis placed, as indeed people spoke of this a quarter of a century ago, on figuring out ways to have a full-time spiritual leader for that congregation.
Right.
And I have heard that there are plans
Right.
in the offing that might make that a possibility.
Yeah, but Ball State would be, I think, I don't mean to be narrow in my in my guesses of how this could happen, but if it didn't work out with Ball State, I don't see how it could work out, unless some family like Eliadis would come forth and give a bunch of money, and like have a funded something, and I don't know if that would happen.
Okay. Well, if that's number 1, do you have a 2 or a 3 after that on your wish list?
I wish that there were someone here in Muncie who were capable of teaching Hebrew, so they didn't have to import somebody from Indianapolis, because that's ridiculous.
Okay.
It's ridiculous.
So what you knew as a young person in terms of what we would both call Hebrew school ought to be part of this community as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, when I was the principal, I don't know a whole lot of Hebrew, but I know the letters, and I know them in printing, and I know them in script, and I know how to read it, and I can play the piano, and I taught them Hatikva, and I taught them the prayers, and I taught them a lot more Hebrew than I knew. Certainly not enough for school, but it was more than they ever had before. And I think the kids should, no matter what else, be able to leave the Sunday school. It's only 2 hours a week, but they should leave the Sunday school experience being able to read and write in Hebrew, maybe not understanding it, but reading the letters and writing the letters is a thing all itself.
Sure.
Reading and writing it, knowing the major prayers, and being able to sing the major songs. And we did have a guy here who was a doctoral student named Aryeh Friedler. I don't know if you knew him. And his wife taught in the English department. And we've maintained our friendship with them. They live in Tel Aviv. And he was great. I mean, he took over being principal after I did, and he taught Hebrew. Just magnificent. Now we have Yaakov Eden.
Oh, really?
He's going off to Korea now for a while, but he's done a good job too.
Yeah. Interesting person. My working hypothesis, faculty member to faculty member for this study, is simply stated something like, if there were no Ball State University or no Ball Memorial Hospital or Cardinal Health Systems, there might not be the Temple of Bethel. How would you respond to that?
I don't know. There are some people who are not associated with these two organizations that you mentioned, and as I came here and and learned more about Judaism because it was no one to do it for me, the people who were here who worked very hard, who are not members of the hospital or the university, who knows what they might do.
Okay.
They might rise. Not that they don't work hard now. I'm just saying that it would be different. I mean, there are people in Marion and people in Anderson, and there would be perhaps some other. You mean if the temple already existed, would it have continued to exist?
Yeah, I'm talking about the 25 years ago when I first embarked upon this area of research. that generation, which again I refer to as the Marty Schwartz generation, those people have largely passed on. Their children, I think most notably in recent months, represented by the departure of the Dobrows and the Malmans, that you now have David Bergauer left, and he's about the only one who's part of the generation of the parents of those people that I interviewed almost a quarter of a century ago. So what you've had happen in that 25-year period is pretty typical of a lot of congregations in communities like Muncie, and that is if you have a draw to bring people who could become part of a Jewish community to the area, in this case, a university, a fairly large public university. Okay, back to what we're talking about. I see this more as a large employer like the hospital and a large employer like the university bringing people to the community who might become part of a congregation. If you did not have the university and you did not have the hospital, and you pulled all these people out of what you just do names in a directory of a congregation, it's a lot of people and it's a lot of talent. That's why I posed the question. I mean, it just strikes me as if those people were not there, if they'd all gone someplace else, if you'd stayed in Philadelphia, if the Eliades had stayed in New York City, that would there still be enough of a congregation to really have congregation? That's my question.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that there are Jews around, and I know there's a nice building, and if these people weren't here, I don't know. I'm less ready, I guess, to draw a conclusion.
Okay.
I can't. Obviously, it would be a great loss
right.
in terms of numbers. We don't have that many numbers as it is.
Yeah.
But there are people who are not part of the university, and there are people in other towns, and maybe you're right. I don't know.
Well, again,
I don't really think about it too much. I'm glad it's how it is.
Well, I am too. I mean, I think that has helped. I'm not going to say ensure the future of a congregation, because you never know what's going to happen in the future of any congregation. But I think certainly in the quarter century, between the time we did the initial study of the Muncie Jewish community and this one, that what really struck me as I began setting up these interviews was the really significant number of people who are not only part of the university community and have been for years, but people who have come here more recently. And I really was taken back by the number of physicians, especially physicians who came here because they had the opportunity to do husband-wife practice, where you have two physicians in a family.
Well, I'm thinking about something else in terms of thinking about your question. The hospital and the university are not now what they were then.
Right, that's true.
And because they've grown so much,
right.
It becomes much more attractive for people to come here. The
yeah.
business community that's here is not what it was before either.
Exactly.
So things don't stay the same, and if the business community had grown, if Ball Corporation had stayed here, if there were very large corporations here, I mean, it's like the Japanese communities around the state where an industry didn't exist, so there weren't any Japanese, and then the industry came down, a lot of Japanese. So a lot of Jewish kids go into medicine,
right,
and a lot of Jewish kids go into education, and here you have medicine and education, so they're going to come. They will come. Build it and they will come. But as business has gone, there's nothing really to attract people.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, the same pattern of the out mobility of children, whether it's your children or our children, is the exact same thing that happened with the Marty Schwartz generation. I mean, the kids didn't stay. The kids don't stay. I mean, what they do is they grow up in Muncie and they go someplace else.
Well, I have thought about that because, I have thought about that. I've seen whether they're children or older people. If they grew up in Muncie, they don't want to stay here.
Right.
But if they grew up in New York, they don't want to stay there.
Yeah,
I'm talking about people who come here.
Right.
I'm not sure it's I think it's a small town, big town thing as opposed to I like being here because I don't like being there. I've already been there.
Yeah.
And so now they're there.
Yeah.
Because they've been here. I mean, it's just like you want something like my parents were liberal because their parents were Orthodox. So I think it's more that than that they leave here because there are no jobs. No, my son's a doctor. He could work at Ball Hospital, and it would be great. But he likes the big city thing because he never had. I mean, he did have it, but he didn't have it the way I had it. There's another thing too, and those are the. I was thinking about this last night, thinking about what things we might talk about. But there is a group of people that have left because Muncie's not religious enough, and that is. It's not a large number, but given the small number that we are, it is a large percentage. So the Goldstones left because it wasn't religious enough. Mendelssohn's left. Zemstovs now have a condo in Indianapolis, and they stay there on the weekends, even though Alex has his job here.
Well, they're still part of the congregation, aren't they?
Yes, but yes.
Nominally,
not like before, because of bickering and stuff. But it really wasn't religious enough for them. And Grossman's, you remember Stan Grossman?
Sure. Yeah.
Those are four that I could think of off the top of my head, specifically because it wasn't religious enough. And not because they like living in Indianapolis. Even Cora's have moved to Indianapolis, but that's because of their kids. No, I'm talking about people who moved because it wasn't religious enough. And I just don't, that's not a problem for me.
Okay, anything else you'd like to add? Any other thoughts, comments, etc.?
I don't know, I'm honored to be interviewed.
Oh, well, my great pleasure.
For me, but I mean, I'm also honored to be interviewed that people care about, the Jewish community, or really any other community, to record the history of a group of people, because I think these things they become lost if they're not recorded. And I just appreciate the effort.
Well, it's nice of you to say that. I think when I got involved with this initially, with Marty, almost 25 years ago, it was, as it is now, kind of a labor of love. I had no idea that he asked me to do this in 2002, 2003, after I'd done this in the 1970s. But it really is interesting to get such different perspectives, although with a lapse of that much time, you would probably expect that you'd get that. But just starting out on this, it's been really interesting to see how people perceive the congregation and the Muncie Jewish community now in a manner in which, or contrasted with the way that Marty's generation saw the community almost 2.5 decades ago.
I would say that the tenor of the group is much more positive now.
Good. There's no question about that.
And I think that the departures you mentioned, while they might be my age, reflect another way of thinking from another time.
Well, I think that's right.
And the people who remain reflect a different way of thinking, which is much more, I guess, in my estimation, more progressive, more positive, less of a victim mentality.
I think that's true. No question about that. Thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome.
Appreciate it.